This is our 9th tutorial in the Introduction to Programming with Python series. Today we're going to look at while loops and how to use the break and continue keywords inside of a loop. So last time we looked at the for loop, and today we're going to look at the while loop. The concept of the while loop is fairly simple. While a certain condition evaluates to true, keep executing the while loop code block. So nothing better than illustrating that with an example in idle. Now, one thing about the while loop is you need to have a condition to evaluate. So if your condition is based on the user input, as our example will be, we have to actually ask for the user input for that condition to be able to evaluate. So let's do that, and we'll see more examples on how to deal with that in a bit. Do you wish to stop or continue? So let's ask the user that even before we start. In our example, let's say continue, and now we can do the while loop. So while So the condition for my while loop will be command equals to the string continue. So as long as command is equal to continue, as long as that evaluates to true, the while loop, the code block inside of this while loop will keep on executing. So that looks fairly simple. While command is equal to continue, print hello world. But here's the thing with the while loop. This condition, the condition you're checking has to be recalculated every time inside the while loop. Otherwise, it will stay with the same value. So right here, what we have done is we have read the command from the user once. We ask the user once, do you wish to stop or continue? User says continue. Now we execute. So command equals continue. This is the first iteration of the loop. It prints hello world. If we don't recalculate the command, in this case, if we don't ask the user again if they wish to stop or continue, well, the command hasn't changed. So it will be true again, and it will execute again and again and again, and this causes an infinite loop. So what we have to do here is we have to recalculate the condition. In this case, ask the user again if they wish to stop or continue, right? And what that means is every time we execute the code block, we do execute the statements that we want inside of the while loop, and then we have to recalculate the condition. Otherwise, the condition would never change. It would either be false all the time, that is, it would never execute, or it would be true all the time, which would cause an infinite loop. And sometimes the calculation is within the statements. We're going to see more complicated examples later on in this tutorial series, but for now, this is all we need. So if I press enter again, it executes the first time because I said continue here. And so the condition the first time evaluated to true. Now if I say continue again, the condition evaluates to true and it goes through the while loop again. And now when I say stop, the while loop will exit. So again, this looks fairly simple. You just need to remember that you always have to recalculate the condition within the while loop code block. Otherwise, it would either be always true or always false. One thing that you'll notice here, of course, is that we had to repeat the command equals input statement twice. I had to do it before I coded the while block, because how else would I have a command equals to continue when I start? And I have to do it here because otherwise it would never change. And you remember from last time we said, don't code anything more than once unless you absolutely have to. So to go around that, we can do one of three things. If the calculation of the condition is complicated, and sometimes it is, like it's multiple steps, we can encapsulate that into a user-defined function and just call it. So that way we encapsulate it into a separate function and we can call it multiple times from multiple places. And we're going to look at user-defined functions later on in this tutorial series. Another thing we can do is we can use an infinite loop, and then inside of this infinite loop, so we can do something like while true, and inside the code block we can use a break statement if the condition holds. And we're going to look at that in this tutorial in the next slide. The third thing we can do is in cases where basically, like in this case, the condition itself is fairly simple. All we're doing is we're asking the user. So we really just have a prompt to the user, do you wish to stop or continue? And we evaluate what the user enters against a particular string. So we can put that directly in here into the while statement, so we can combine the input statement and the while statement. That way we don't have to repeat it twice. So we can say while input, do you wish to stop or continue, equals to continue. What this will do is every time it goes through again, it will reevaluate this condition. When it reevaluates the condition, it will execute the input statement, prompting the user, do you wish to stop or continue? When the user enters stop or continue, it will read that into a string and evaluate it against the continue string we have here. If it evaluates the true, it executes. If it's false, it will exit. So if I say continue, it will execute. If I say stop, it will exit. Again, this works for the simple conditions. For more complicated conditions that require multiple statements, this wouldn't work. We're going to look at that a bit later. Okay, so now that we've seen the while loop and the for loop, one thing to note is sometimes, or most of the time, we can actually use them interchangeably. We can choose which one to use, the while or the for. And they accomplish the same thing. They allow us to execute a block of code repeatedly a number of times. The for loop lends itself to iterating over sequences, but we can also do the same thing using a while loop. So to illustrate an example, let's go back to the courses list we built last tutorial by basically asking the user, how many courses are you taking? Then we did a for loop to allow us to ask the user to enter their course name that many times, add it to the list, and say, here is your courses list. Okay, so I'll start with an empty list. And then in the while loop, we have two ways of doing this in a while loop. We can actually do it without asking the user how many courses they're taking. We can tell them, do you have more courses to take? Y, N. And this way, every time the loop executes, it will say, do you have more courses to take? Yes, no. And if the user says yes, we can read the course name. Right? So do you have more courses? Yes. Do you have more courses? Yes. And no. And my courses list is now math and English. Now you'll note here that I'm asking the user every time, which may get annoying if I already know the number of courses I'm taking. But in some situations, I don't know the size of the list I'm building beforehand. And so that way, I can't start by asking the user, how many items do you have in your list? So instead, every time I say to the user, enter the new list or do something that I'm going to create a new list item for you. And then we ask, do you have more to add, yes or no? So yes, in this particular example, this probably doesn't make sense because why should I keep on asking the user every time they have more courses to take? The user already knows how many courses they're taking. I can ask them once how many courses and then iterate that number of times and ask for the course name. But you should take a look at this because this can be useful sometimes where I'm building a list the size of which I don't know beforehand. But let's say I wanted to actually do the exact same thing we did the last time using a for loop, using a while loop. Let me reset my courses list. So let's say I'm going to ask the user how many courses they're taking, right? Same thing we did. Let's say 4. Convert that to an int. Okay, and now in the for loop, I did something like this. I did for index in range of courses. What that did is the range created a sequence of numbers, 0, 1, 2, 3, and the for loop allowed me to iterate over that. I didn't use the variable index inside, right? But I had to do it. And I didn't have to define the variable index before because inside of a for loop, it will define it for me. And each time we go over the sequence item, it will assign it to the next item in that sequence. Now, if I wanted to do a while loop, I would go while, and let's say I'm going to count how many courses I asked the user to enter so far. I'm going to say I'm going to have a counter variable, and my condition, because this is a while loop, would be, so every time I ask the user, I'm going to add it to the counter. I'm going to say, while the counter is less than the number of courses the user is taking, ask the user again to enter the course name. The problem with that is, this is a while loop, and if I execute this without defining counter, Python will complain. So what I have to do is I have to define the counter variable. I haven't asked the user to enter any courses so far. So basically the counter starts at 0, and then I go while counter is less than the number of courses. So as long as I haven't asked the user to enter the course name 4 times in this case, I keep going. So here, course name, this is the same piece of code as in the other one. Now here, remember, because this is a while loop, you have to recalculate the condition, otherwise it will keep going forever. So every time I ask the user, I ask the user one more time, so I have to increment my counter. And I can do plus equal 1. And what that will do is, if Python sees this, plus equal, it will add 1, or it will add whatever you have here, in this case being 1, to this variable. I can also do minus equal, and that will subtract this number from this variable, and so on. So I can increment by 2, I can increment by 3, or the more common situation is you increment by 1. Okay, so every time I execute, I ask the user for a course name, add it to the list, and then I'll increment my counter variable by 1. So this will ask me enter the course name. It should ask only 4 times. And there, I'm done. So the counter started with 0, 1, 2, 3, and then when it became 4, that condition evaluates to false and exits. And my courses list is as I would expect. So again, this example illustrates that we can do the exact same way we did it in the previous tutorial using the for loop. We can do it using a while loop. And again, with the while loop, you have more options like we have here on top. Right. So this is just to show that you can use one or the other. Again, when you have a predefined sequence that you want to iterate over, for loop most of the time makes more sense. And again, a lot of this you will learn to apply your own style as you learn how to program. So we were mentioning in the previous slide that we can use the infinite loop with a break statement so that we only code the condition calculation once. And we can do that because the break statement causes the loop to exit. So now we're going to look at the 2 loop controls, the break and the continue. And like we said, the break will allow us to exit the loop. If you use it in a while loop, it will cause the loop to exit, regardless of the condition. If you use the break in a for loop, it will exit regardless of where the for loop is within that list. And this is very useful sometimes. So to illustrate that, let's look at an example. So we were saying that we can do an infinite loop. So while true is an infinite loop, the condition obviously is always true. And here I can do my block, whatever the block is. In this case, just a simple print hello world. And then here, I can do my prompting of the user. Do you wish to continue or stop? Right? So this is what we did before, and we said we could do this using an infinite loop with a break. So if the user says stop, then we do break. So basically this will say, hello world, do you wish to continue or stop? And once the user says stop, this code block inside the if will be executed. The break statement will execute and it will exit the while loop. So continue, continue, and when I say stop, it will exit. And this is what a break statement does, and this is how it's used. Again, very useful sometimes. Now, the continue, which is the other loop control that I'd like to look at, allows you to basically skip the rest of the code block. So not so much exit, the break would exit. If Python encounters a continue keyword inside of a loop, it will skip the rest of the code block. So to illustrate that again, let's look at the courses list we were building. So again, with the courses list example, and let's say we're going to go with while the user says I have more courses, or let's say while true, so that we can illustrate the break and the continue in the same example. Let's say while true, And here I'm going to combine, so I only prompt the user once. Before that, we were prompting the user multiple times. Do you wish to continue? Do you have more courses? Yes or no? If you say yes, then we'll ask you for the course name. But a lot of these times, we can combine them. We can say, enter course name or done when finished. So I only need to prompt the user once. Okay, and notice here that I have double quotes, and I can use them to highlight to the user a particular word, and I can use it just fine within single quoted strings. So if the course name the user entered is done, which is really not a course name, it's telling us that the user has entered all the courses they are taking. We break. Now here, if the course name is already in the courses list, because lists, as I have mentioned before, they allow you to have duplicate items. So if the user enters math the first time and enters math the second time, the list will say nothing. It's not a problem. You can have math multiple times in that list. But if I only wanted to add the course name if it's not in that list, so only add it if it's unique. So in this case, I can say if course name in courses. So remember, this is a conditional operator that will say if course name is in courses, it will give you true. So if I already have math and the user enters math again, then it will say true, and this code block will execute. Here I can say continue. And what that will does is it will skip the rest of the code block inside the loop. And the rest of my code block is where I actually append it to the list. So if you say done, we'll exit. If you enter a course name that's already in our list, we say continue, which will skip this statement. And if neither of these is true, then we execute this, which is appending the course name to the list. Then here I say math, math. So I've entered math 3 times, then I say done. And my courses list has only math and English. So basically that's how the continue statement works. An interesting thing here, you may be thinking, well, I can do this using an if statement, and you're absolutely true. I can either do the same thing, if course name in courses, do whatever, else append it, or I can actually flip the if statement and say, if not course name in courses, add the course name, append it to the courses list. That works fine, and this is really a matter of style. Now, one way to look at this is, my normal case is I'm going to append the course name to the courses list. This is the normal situation. It's only an exception that the user would enter the same course name more than once. They really shouldn't. I expect that the user would enter unique course names. And so this is my main coding block, and this is my regular case, and this is sort of the exception. And that's why sometimes, as a matter of style, programmers prefer to use continue. But it works just exactly the same. And just to illustrate that again, let's reset courses and say while true, again, same thing, course name equals input or done when finished, right? If it's done, you break. That's the only way to exit from an infinite loop. Now here I'm going to use if not course name in courses, right? So not basically will negate whatever condition this happens to be. So if course name in courses returns true, not will make it false. If it returns false, not will make it true. And so if not course name in courses, now I can append the course name to the courses list, right? So math, English, math, math, English, just for fun, done. And my courses list, again, only has math and English. So again, this is to illustrate that, yes, we don't need to use the continue. We can actually do it in using if or if else or if else statements. Again, it's a matter of style. It's important for me to show you these things. And hopefully, as you learn how to program, you'll lean towards one or the other. The first exercise for this tutorial is to build a generic number adder. Keep prompting the user to enter a number or done when they're finished, and then display the number of numbers they have entered, the total, and the average. So basically you write a Python program, and when you run it, it should do something like this. Enter a number or done when you're finished. So you enter a number, another number, another number, and you keep going. And when you're finished, you say done. And then it should say you entered 5 numbers. That's the number of numbers I've entered. Total is 116. That's the addition of these 5 numbers. The average is 23.2. And that's what your program should do. As a second exercise for this tutorial, let's do our for loop exercise from the previous tutorial using a while loop. Ask the user how many students they have in the class, and then use a while loop to ask them that many times to enter a student name and a student grade, and then when you're finished, pretty print the names and the grades. Just to note, the pretty printing you can still use a for loop for because that's just a lot easier, but the asking the user to enter the students and their grades, do that in a while loop. So again, when you run that, it should look like this. How many students do you have in your class? Let's say 4. And then when you're finished, it will say your class grades are as follows and pretty print. Again, the pretty printing segment, keep it the same, use a for loop. But the first segment where you ask the user 4 times or that many times for their student and their mark, do that in a while loop. So next time we're going to take a break from looking at further programming concepts, and we're going to use what we already learned to create a simple high-low number guessing game. So this is where you say, think of a number between, say, 1 and 1 million, and the computer tries to guess it for you within, of course, a reasonable number of times. If I tell you to think of a number from 1 to a million, it doesn't make sense for me to guess 1 million times until I find the number. Now, as usual, the links to the exercise solutions are available in the video description. I hope you give them a try, and until next time.